So I want to thank you for attending this webinar entitled Poverty in Hamilton with Laura Cattari from the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. I want to start off before I do Laura's bio to say how happy I am to have her here. And she was really one of the first people I met when I started my job. It was at a Pesach dinner, and I had the privilege of sitting at table with her and having a conversation about poverty and about Jewish poverty. And she gave me some really good ideas that helped to shape my work here at Hamilton Jewish Family Services. So, you know, I do want to say, and this is going to be how Laura chooses to run this conversation, but I do want to say it's important we have this conversation about poverty in Hamilton, because the reality is there's Jewish poverty in Hamilton, and we need to have this conversation. The last study showed that Jewish poverty was at 14.6%. That study was in 2014. And since then, the numbers have risen while there's no formalized study. 1 in 6 Jewish seniors live in poverty. So there is this myth that Jewish poverty doesn't exist. It does. We have families that are going to our food bank requesting help for food because they are food insecure. We have 34 families who are on our financial assistance program where we provide assistance to make sure that they are not homeless. We have had Jewish people in the community who are homeless come to us for help. Housing insecurity, food insecurity, mental health, all of these are concerns with the broader community and also with the Jewish community. And poverty is a really important thing that we have to work towards ending and eliminating, starting off by reducing, but also we need to build a just society. So Laura Cattari, she is a fantastic senior policy analyst with the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. She specializes in income security and disability. She was part of the previous provincial's income security reform working group who co-designed Income Security Roadmap for Change. Laura also serves on the board of directors for Canada Without Poverty, formerly NAPO, and the Hamilton Community Foundation. Laura is also a dedicated member of the Hamilton Jewish community, and she's a change maker. So let's just give Laura a warm welcome and turn it over to her.
And Doreen, stop screen sharing, please.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Stop pressing buttons.
Okay, I'm taking my hand off my mouse.
Okay. I have no idea. I'm looking at your screen, so I'm going to
I don't know what I did.
View options. I'm going to I guess side by side. I can't stop her screen sharing, but I'm going to go gallery for sure. So, hello. I had an idea for this evening. I tend to go off into statistics and really dry material because I'm a bit of a policy geek and numbers and data really matters to me. But I find to engage people, it's better to take a slightly different tact. And so since this is the first time in a long time that I've been able to talk about poverty in general, not specifically disability or basic income or payday loans or something in particular, just speaking about it in general, I thought, given the numbers that Alexis kicked us off with and looking historically at the numbers, 2011 had a census that included a religious affiliation. And so we were able to get data from that census as well. Jewish poverty is generally no better or worse than poverty overall. It's just not. We'd like to think, you know, we have it together, we have our services, everyone's okay. But it's not necessarily true. And it's a hard one to internalize because I think for most of us, we don't understand exactly what poverty is. And when I started with the Roundtable, just as a general member back then, back in 2011, the first meeting was a transition between our old chair and our new chair coming in. And the old chair, Mark Chamberlain, said this about poverty. He said, poverty is not income. Income is not poverty. But poverty always is about income somewhere in the story. And it was my first introduction to stories and listening to people and their experiences. And I started to realize, and I kind of hate to say this, but in my 20s, I pretty much was one of those people sort of like, well, if you put enough elbow grease behind it, you'll get it. And you'll get somewhere and you'll just move on and everything will be fine. You know, you're just not trying hard enough to overcome. And in my 30s, I became ill and experienced disability. And with disability is one of those things we like to call a marginalizing factor. I began to experience poverty. And I started to realize that it's not just about being smart. You can't outsmart poverty because it's not about making bad decisions or any decision that's worse than anyone else's decision. What I began to understand, especially when I started with the Roundtable, is that we take for granted a lot of the supports that are around us in our lives. Losing a job does not mean poverty. Losing a job without family and friends and living alone could mean poverty and homelessness. That poverty is very much circumstantial and where you find yourself in. What happens when things happen in your life are determined by a host of things that make it really about privilege and not having privilege. I think privilege is a good word for this. It's understanding that a single mom with 3 kids doesn't go to the doctor because she can't take time off work and she can't drag her 3 kids with her and there's no one to watch them. So she puts it off until she ends up in ER because she's got triple or quadruple pneumonia because she didn't take care of her cold in the first place. It's about a family living so close to the edge that losing their car because their car broke down means they can't get out to an industrial area and get to work. Part of that is changing. I mean, I remember 20 years ago, my car breaking down. I was living in Barrie, working in Toronto. I don't recommend that to anyone. But luckily we had a sister shop and someone that would drive me down to Toronto. We don't live in those kind of communities anymore. We don't live with that connectedness anymore that anyone you work with, you can just call up and say, hey, give me a ride to work. Poverty in Hamilton has come in waves and it's come for different reasons. I bet growing up, when I thought of poverty, it was a very limited picture. People talked a lot about intergenerational poverty. You talk about very poor circumstances where the sole breadwinner, broke his back at his job and, people would bring a basket over from your community and take care of that person. What's happening today is much deeper and wider. And yes, social isolation plays a big part before and after. I'm going to open the chat so I could see those more easily as they come up. I just saw a little number pop up that I missed something. So poverty today stems from a changing society. Our intergenerational poverty is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We've gotten really good at working with young mums and interventions, including a great nurse mother program in Hamilton that follows a young woman for 2 years. And their sole purpose is to be with her and support her so she can get a short degree before she has her second child. And they found if they can intervene and get a degree or a diploma and get someone working and delay the second child, that family, even though it's a single parent family, will be above the poverty line because she now has the tools to cope. She may not have the family. She may be relying on friends or family of choice, as I like to call it. But reaching out to others and just delaying the second child works. So today we're looking a lot, and I'm going to break this up by different age groups. So seniors poverty, we had a huge problem with for a long time. Even though we brought in GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, we found we still had a lot of seniors poverty until we realized people were not signing up for GIS. It wasn't automatic. Paperwork wasn't going through. They weren't getting the money that they were supposed to have. And so Hamilton in particular really made a concerted effort to get out there in the community and ensure that people have all the supports they're entitled to. And it helped seniors poverty for a little bit. And we're starting to see seniors poverty rise again. And what we're noticing is that consumer price index, I'm going to try not to be nerdy about this, but the consumer price index is not keeping up with low income or fixed income, depends how you want to word it, inflation. So yes, you know, okay, hilarious example, not hilarious, but oil prices tanked about 10 years ago out west, and CPI decided they would go -16 on transportation costs because everyone had all this cheap gas. But if you live in poverty or you're a senior, you probably don't even have a car. And they didn't reduce bus fare and they didn't reduce taxi prices or any of the other methods that people who do not rent cars would get around with. And so you tend to find seniors' incomes, those with social assistance, those with disabilities, do not follow the same spending pattern. So we've been trying to get the government, we, Roundtable, other advocates, to look at a seniors' price index. How did they spend money? What are their biggest areas? So there's that. There's the idea that CPP retirement has also not kept up. And if you've been following the news, you'll notice this year the premiums are going to go up. Well, that's really great, sort of, kind of. But what about all the other people like me who are rapidly approaching my retirement time and people who've already retired, that the amount from CPP disability just isn't enough, who didn't live with enough to put hundreds of thousands away, private pensions. So that's seniors. And part of what we're also seeing that makes it even more difficult, we talk about in Ontario aging in place. It's very difficult to get home supports to do that, even if you've paid for your home. And most residential care facilities, even if you don't need intense supports, just seniors buildings, are priced out of reach for most seniors. And especially if you're a widower with one income, it becomes incredibly difficult to afford. And so even if you're not living in deep poverty, the price of even just getting affordable housing, if you're not going to keep your home, is really difficult. So it's sort of house rich, cash poor, as they say. Yes, so seniors are feeling that. So the next one, and I'm doing this in kind of an order because, well, it tends to get worse. So we deal with seniors, we treat them pretty much the best. And the next category up is people with disabilities. And even though, anyone familiar with social assistance in Ontario and what rates are? I'm going to give you what the rates are right now. So Ontario Works, which would otherwise be known as welfare, is $733 a month. No, I did not make a mistake. It really is per month, $733. And for disability, it's $1,169. Now, if you look at average rent in Hamilton is more than that. Right now, even the most modest places that are okay, you're not dealing with black mold or roach issue, you're looking at $1,200. So we already see a little problem with this. So people with disabilities, it's been interesting. My whole day yesterday was about disabilities. I literally had 3 different meetings and I only had one scheduled, which made my life really interesting on a day off. So this idea with disabilities that there are all these things that help people out. So let's talk about what's happened with disabilities, because I think even for myself before I became ill, there are things I assumed were there. So I was making a fairly good wage until the company I was working for got purchased by another one, and I got laid off, and I got 6 months or 3 months of extended drug, dental, and insurance. It ended on December 12th. And January 4th, I was declared disabled. So literally by 3 weeks, I missed long-term disability insurance through work. 3 weeks. 3 weeks made, if I'm calculating correctly, about a $30,000 difference annually in my income. So none of that. Then you have to apply for CPP disability, which is pretty much a denial system until you threaten them with a tribunal. And then, oh dear Ms. Qatari, upon reviewing your file for the tribunal, we found you are indeed disabled. Why, thank you. Thank you. I've only been starving on Ontario Works, which back then, 20 years ago, was closer to $620 a month for almost a year until you got that determination. But there are other things that have been eroded. It's not just my personal story. So Workmen's Compensation Board, workers' comp, as we lovingly have called it in Ontario for a very long time, does not exist as it used to. And in fact, most people are denied except for the most egregious and obvious instances. Where are these people going? On Ontario Disability Support Program for $1,169. CPP disability because we didn't do enough contributions to our regular retirement plan. And CPP is only, I believe it's 25% of what you would get the retirement amount plus a flat rate. Most people average about $900 a month on it, not enough to live on by any stretch of the imagination. So you end up applying for yet another program, which is ODSP. That ODSP amount, the Auditor General, about 2 years ago now, decided that way too many people are being approved and way too many people go to adjudication and win. So something's wrong with the system. You got to cut back on all these people getting on this system. And that's why it's growing like crazy. It's not growing like crazy. Yes, it's increasing, most definitely. We have this little thing called an aging population right now, a rapidly aging population, because this little group called boomers are aging out of work. And as they do, what tends to happen to that population is they get sick. They have disabilities. And so they'll go on ODSP earlier than their retirement age. And 62% of people in Southern Ontario don't have extended health benefits through work, including long-term disability. And we are living more stressful lives. And EI sick benefits only last, and they've reduced it now to 60, and it used to be 17 weeks. I don't know what that 1 week difference is. So you can go through some heart surgery, but it's not going to carry you through all of it. Or maybe your first mental health episode where you need a few months till you stabilize. But really, there's nothing else. So subsidies through Trillium benefits, you need money up front. So I think for a single, you're looking at about $1,000 in deductibles. So $1,000 of your meds before they kick in. It's much like the seniors plan as well. There's a seniors plan that says, you know, you have to pay $100. Well, with Trillium, it's about $1,000. And it's only prescription drugs. Right? So, but that does bring to the other part. So people also don't have money for drugs and pharmacare. Most people do not have drug plans anymore. So even if you're making an okay wage and you have a child or yourself who need higher cost medication, you know, we're talking asthma pumps or other steroids that sometimes are needed to go along with that. You can look at $200 to $300 easily a month, and your quasi-comfortable wage becomes a bit impossible. It becomes more difficult. So disability is an odd one for that because there's an extended cost, not just for your cost of living, which we think about when we think of poverty, but also to get everything you need. And then there's the idea of living like that for a long time. So what do you need over time that's not regularly being paid for? And even if you're in the workforce, if you have reduced hours over a lifetime, what kind of lost wages are those and how does that impact what you can afford? So it gets a bit complicated. Scoop past disability. Now, the reason they're so important, and I'll say it now, is that food banks are a great indicator of where poverty is going or how it's moving. And food banks of Ontario have identified for a number of years, seniors and people with disabilities are their newer and larger clients than ever. Now, part of that is because with Canada Child Benefit, There have been a lot of families that have been okay now because that amount has gone up. They've changed the name, they've added a few $100s, it's gotten better. In fact, even if you were on social assistance as a family and you had 2 children, you would make it just above the poverty line. And a single parent with 2 children would make it just slightly over the poverty line. But and I'm not saying that poverty line is high by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll get into that in a sec too. But the new poverty, or where we're going, trends, is seniors and those with disabilities. Then when we talk about marginalized groups, we start talking newcomers. And newcomers, it's starting, it means the first 5 years someone's in Canada, they don't have a lot of income and it takes time to start up lives. Out of every group, that's the group that tends to move over the hump the most. And after the 5 years, they tend to work their way out. Part of that is language. Part of that is skills adoption and even, getting properly referenced academically here so you can go out and apply for jobs. And that takes time. The next group is basically people of color, and if we're going to be blunt, it's Black people. Poverty rates among Black people in our community are much higher, regardless of education status. So a lot of the studies that have come out of the States have shown even if you have masters between 2 people and one's a white person and one's a Black person and you both have masters in something, the white person will make more income off their masters than a Black person will. And it has to do with racism and stigma and opportunity. And it's something we can't even begin to properly cover this evening, but I think it is important to say that it exists, because the last group is probably the highest poverty rates in Canada, which is Indigenous groups in Canada. We're talking poverty rates over 50%, 54% of children. And we're talking Hamilton. We're talking about a median wage of $21,000 in Hamilton. We're talking double the amount of teenage homelessness. Part of that is not being able to live on reserve, and children will come to the city to attend high school and quite literally have no place to claim as home as they study. And there's no transportation that's ever been set up, even between Cayuga and here. It's a huge, huge issue. I don't want to delve into that specifically because it's not my specialty. And I think it's always great working on something together as a text to learn together in that case, or even reaching out to those communities and asking, what resources do you recommend so we can learn what's happening in Hamilton? I was privileged to be able to work on a few projects, just learning, and it was devastating to see what's happening locally, the lack of funding. There's a whole Indian Act, things funded on reserve, not in the city, even though they need to come to the city, and it's a really bad funding situation, and youth are probably the hardest hit out of any of them with the situation. But let's go back to social inclusion, isolation. I found every time I talk to someone about poverty, well, why don't you just, And I usually get this litany of all the things you can do. Just do X. And I say, well, how? How are you going to do X? Well, you get online. Well, what if you can't afford to be online? Well, on your computer, well, you know, if someone's been on assistance for a while, their computer and software might be outdated and they might be scrambling to even have the hardware. Well, you can just go to the library and get a computer, which is true now. Finally, you can do this. It's up to cost $6 there and back. So, you know, why don't we walk 11 blocks downhill and then back uphill if you live in my neighborhood around Corktown. Everything's back uphill as I come home. It drives me nuts. So you're wandering around trying to do the most basic things. And it's not an excuse. But living on $733 does this weird psychological thing. It puts you in panic mode constantly. $733 leaves you fearful for your survival 24/7. It's constantly, where am I going to get my next meal? Can I sleep here tonight? Am I going to be able to do it tomorrow? What if this bed bug thing doesn't get cleared up and I need a new mattress and I can't afford a new mattress and I had one last year and they're not going to give me another one? Do I sleep on the floor with these bugs? And how do I get my clothes cleaned? And if I don't do it, my landlord wants to kick me out because I can't afford to. And these are stories of people that I know telling me this. People that I work with who are incredible advocates. I'm not there in a helping capacity. I'm there to listen and amplify their voices in what I do, to talk about the crazy making it is to leave someone on 733 and then talk about them as if you've left them in the lap of luxury, because it's so easy to live like that. Oh, you know, it's so much simpler than going to work. It's not. It's not. And psychologically, it's very difficult to focus on a future. And so where does the roundtable come in with things like this? Well, we talked a little bit about GIS and what we did with that. We also try and ensure that people get their taxes done. You will find lowest income people tend not to do their taxes because they're like, oh, I don't know anything. Why should I do my taxes? You know, it's not even fraud. It's not that I owe them something. Not realizing how much they can claim. And so we helped put together a group. It's being run through Social Planning and Research Council now. It's been a 3-year pilot. Hamilton helps, Hamilton Tax Help. They have, and it's an unofficial figure, but you're going to get the inside scoop here, over $4.5 million in 3 years of unclaimed tax benefits that they got people in Hamilton. $4.5 million they had no idea they were entitled to. And even people who owed money, by getting them either exempted or having it reduced to something that was manageable, and by filing the taxes so those credits that they're entitled to could go towards paying what they owed Revenue Canada, and within a year they can start getting their money again. It's amazing. it's amazing getting services set up just to get what they're entitled to that most people don't realize they're entitled to. We deal with predatory lending. And yes, predatory lending is the word, the phrase that we use. It has been proven and admitted to. Their prime clients, 11 out of 15, are repeat clients that they get hooked because they can't pay their original loan. So they have to get another loan to cover the first loan. And it just balloons. And the amount that they're paying, because what they advertise is only 2 weeks. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of interest. But you're looking, well, what used to be was over 500% a year. Right now, you're looking at closer to 346% if you can't pay it off as soon as you get it. The provincial government right now took our advice. It was actually very nice to see, to freeze interest and not let it compound during the pandemic, during COVID right now. Because people were out of work and it would have been crazy almost immediately. We also look at how they set up, and what has tended to happen in Hamilton especially is areas where you will find payday lenders, you will not find banks. The two do not coexist. The closest thing is downtown Hamilton. And so what we did was create, help the city create radial zoning. So you could only have one payday lender within a certain radius. And it's gotten to the point where they're just not issuing new licenses anymore, which we're very happy about. But there is a problem. People do need emergency funds. And so that goes to the next part of understanding poverty is about resources as well as income. If you do not have good credit, which usually comes from having some form of assets, so having a home, having a car, having a big loan that you've paid off already once that shows a really good credit habit, and you don't have the income coming in, any emergency will set you back really harshly. And I am thrilled that there's the small loan program, the Jewish loan program, because not having $1,000 can seriously disrupt someone's life. It could be everything from an emergency car repair to being able to pay first and last to move into a new place. Or movers, so you can get out of a bad situation, or whatever. Most of the time, loans that are offered to people that are lower income, not necessarily in poverty, but just lower income, are not, oh, I just looked at the time, I'm almost up. One of the things they look at, it's sort of like, well, you don't have enough income, so we'll give you this loan, but we'll do it at double the interest rate. Well, if you think it's going to be harder for me to pay, why are you upping the payment by creating more interest? So the second part to what we're doing is actually looking at credit unions, and Van City has been doing a fantastic job. They have another product, it's a different brand, but they do short-term loans. They're doing what the banks used to do, the $200-300 loan, the $500 loan. Banks don't do those anymore, but those are the ones that can really make or break people that desperately need it. You don't want them going to Money Mart. You don't want them going anywhere like that, because if they couldn't pay a bill when it came up, taking that money out of their income in the next 2 weeks is going to make something else go out of whack, right? Like you don't want a 2-week repayment. You want something that's reasonable and manageable given their income. I'm looking at the time, there's so much to go into. So I'm going to ask you, is there any area you want me to touch on? I mean, we do basic income, we've done income security. I've been working on the new federal disability tax, the Canadian disability benefit that they're apparently going to model after GIS. Yeah, is there anything you'd like to ask or talk about? Because it's a huge thing and 45 minutes is way too, way too short. If you want to get on voice or type it in chat. I'm not even sure if I covered what you want to know in particular.
No. You know what, Laura, this has been great. I want to ask one question before, and other people feel free to, I wanted to give them a breathing minute to kind of collect their thoughts. But my question is, what are you seeing? What is the Roundtable seeing with poverty in relation to COVID-19? I think that is a big thing. And what about the government and kind of social security safety net that's been happening? Is it being effective? What are you guys seeing right now?
So that's a great question.
You're like, do another 5 hours, Alexis? Like,
so who is it impacting? It's okay. First and foremost, it impacts everyone. It's going to be hard for everyone. There are a lot of people that have not being able to transfer their jobs to home. I know, despite being, sorry, I need to chew just a little bit, refresh my mouth. No, it always happens if I talk too long, I get pasty mouth. So everyone's had it tough. But what we found financially, the hardest hit are those in poverty, because, you know, it's, remember a friend of mine sent me a headline that was coming through, I think it was Financial Post, how much money we're all saving during the pandemic. And I'm like, all right, I don't know about your lifestyle, but I'm on really limited income. And I've spent more money because of the pandemic, not less. Because I can't get out and about in the same way. And trying to get either things delivered, paying for taxi cabs that I usually wouldn't use, shopping in places I normally wouldn't shop rather than going to certain grocery stores I used to go to for fear factor now. My life isn't easier. And I talk to friends who are single parents who have tried so hard during the pandemic to look for new work. I have a friend, she found a new job during the pandemic. Kudos to her. But they keep wanting to close schools. And starting a new job and having your child home with you and homeschooling a 7-year-old is not what she wants to be doing. And she was limited. So here's the thing. Yes, CERB was very good at covering a lot of people's incomes. They even allowed for a double dip for higher incomes. That 2,000 wouldn't have been enough. And they did it through a wage subsidy directly to employers to do that. But the people who had the more precarious work, they've been hardest hit because they've had to continue working. And all those special wage subsidies for being frontline heroes have not come through. And when you look at the data, if you look at Social Planning and Research Council, they've been fantastic. They put something out last August showing, you know what, it's Black, Latina, people of color working those front lines in hospitals and getting ill. And if you look at COVID stats, hold on one sec, I need to cough, I'm so sorry. Not COVID, just dry throat, dry apartment. Look at their stats. It has been really interesting to look at the play between race and income and COVID. It's been really serious. And yeah, sorry. I'm reading Kim's question. Shouldn't have done that before I finished answering. So it's been hard. That said, I think the government has done well. We'd love to see them transition to a basic income, because what we've learned in the pandemic is that EI does not work for the vast majority of workers. It just doesn't. When I sat down and we found out that they were going to include these precarious workers, I looked at EI and how it was calculated at 60%. I looked at the median income in Ontario and Hamilton, and I realized more than 50% of people, if it was EI and not CERB or CRB, would be getting $343 a week. That's the median. 50% of people would get $343 and would not have made it through the pandemic, for sure. So it's food for thought. we need a new system, and EI isn't it. So I have a question from Kim. Projections for people living. What do you mean the projections? Health-wise or? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just like the numbers for the people who will be living below the poverty line, back to work, as a result of the pandemic and all the other, I guess, financial problems of the pandemic in Hamilton. That helps.
Yeah.
The big, too big.
So their actual fiscal picture, it's going to be hard. I mean, the feds just announced they're going to extend CRB. Just now, like last week, announced they would extend CRB. Well, we've already been through a second lockdown where most people couldn't work. And they're talking about a third wave already. Okay, so I know the province's concession to this, if the feds don't cover them, is that everyone's going to go on Ontario Works. So they've updated, done a digital update so people can apply for Ontario Works online, just like you did during the pandemic with the feds. It's up to $733. They're not going to give you extra. And I find that terrifying. If you looked at the end of October as the unemployment rate and how many people were unemployed, so actively looking, but not employed. And I use October because most financial experts said, you know what, if you were going to reopen, you would have done it by the end of October, right? So it was a good time to look at these employment stats. There would be an additional 18,000 people in Hamilton that still weren't employed yet. 18,000 people. And if you took away CRB, that would be an additional 18,000 people on $733 a month. You have to understand when people hit that bottom, it's totally a blind spot. Well, depends. I'm going to qualify that because it wasn't widely publicized, but there's a new vision for social assistance they announced just last week. And if I'm sounding like I'm doing my radio voice with this, it's because I am. And this new vision, we're just going to get tougher, making everyone, including those with disabilities, go back to work. You know, let me tell you, Dalton McGuinty tried this. It didn't work. It was a whole lot of money, and people didn't become employed. And Mike Harris tried it, and it didn't work. Ontario Works, the workfare program that it was initially supposed to be, was canceled in less than 1 year because it didn't work. And when you look at the UK, so Hamilton is part of a pilot right now in delivering this kind of stuff. And it's a group called FedCap. It's FedCap Canada, but it's part of a larger conglomerate, a global conglomerate. And the head person that deals with Hamilton is actually in Wales, telling us what our employment support should look like. It's kind of ridiculous. So it's going to be another spending spree by the province, potentially harming people with disabilities. And it just kind of drives me nuts. So the only time they pay attention is when they want to break it. That said, I used to, actually, Alexis mentioned it. I write it in as part of my bio. It's called Income Security Roadmap to Change. It was a 10-year plan to transform social assistance. Right now, what they're writing, what they've announced, looks like they're doing my roadmap. They're using my language. Anyone can use these services. You don't have to be getting OW assistance to ask for help. Isn't that wonderful? Except they're not putting any money into wraparound supports. So you could go in and talk to someone and they could say you need mental health supports, but there's no mental health supports to be found. And there's no affordable housing to be found. And they're not raising the rates. And they're not putting money into the system in any way, shape, or form. But they want to do our roadmap without investing in it. And that's not going to work. Let me see. I'm sort of following here as best as I can as we're affordable housing. Okay, the biggest problem with affordable housing is that we're about 15 years too late for maximum effort. In 2018 or 19, I think it was 2019, we did a report with Social Planning and Research Council talking about landlord and tenant protections and what happens if you get tougher protections so that you keep prices down, like rent controls, the whole 9 yards. And actually vacancy decontrol, which is an even bigger problem. So as soon as you move out, don't let them jack up rents. Mm-hmm. And we keep being told, well, the industry is not going to last if you do that. So we did a comparison with Quebec City. And Quebec has some of the most stringent landlord and tenant protocols in Canada. And from 2011 to 2019, they had 12,000 rental starts in Quebec City. In the same period of time in Hamilton, we had 700. So it's not a matter that we can't do better laws. It's not a problem. Sorry, go ahead.
I said it's our government.
The more you incentivize bad behavior, the more you're going to continue to get bad behavior. Right? You can't use a horse and cart and the carrot and the stick and keep using the carrot if they're not going in the direction you want. Like you can't. And so when we did that report, well, what if they don't like it? Well, I'm sorry, have you ever seen a developer sit on money and not want to make any money at all? No. Stop discounting developments in urban sprawl, and it is deeply discounted. So development costs are deeply discounted and you pay for it. For every new house that's built, you pay for discounted development costs, not the builder, not the new homeowner, instead of building rental. So I don't know who else is on. Affordable housing consistency. Yeah, we're trying different modes. I'm also part of Hamilton Community Foundation, and affordable housing is on our radar. Purpose-built housing for supportive housing is, believe it or not, easier because there are a lot of funding sources for putting it together and for operating it once it's built. It's getting affordable housing for everyone. So the one group that I didn't put in my marginalized group, because they're not necessarily marginalized, they're just new, is singles.
Mm.
Singles are the largest group or household type right now in Canada, and 1 in 3 live in poverty. And it doesn't matter the age. I think there's a slight increase in the 20s in the poverty part, but it's not just because they're young. I live on my own. I'm in my 50s. It's not cheap. We are not getting married. And right now, the rental market is just at a standstill because people can't afford to buy. So they're not giving up their spaces either. And it's really tough, Amy, for sure. And I have no immediate hope on the horizon, which is even scary.
I think it's so difficult, especially when I'm hearing from clients repeatedly, especially those from lower income areas where there are people from Toronto moving, and yes, there's lots of good things happening in the area as a result of this, but it's also driving rent up massively so, and it's a real concern.
There's nowhere in Ontario anymore that hasn't been touched by the Toronto sprawl. There's nowhere. Windsor used to be my last hope in the back of my mind, that if I sold up here, I could go and buy something there and be okay. Take Windsor off the table. It's hit Windsor. When it hits Windsor, the cheapest of cheap places in Ontario, you know it's bad. And so, sorry, was it Mala? Yes. So, yeah, Sarnia. So it's actually 31 point something percent, which is pretty, 33 is 1 in 3. So singles poverty is really high. And we're not talking about it. And as a community, I think when we start looking at keeping our community vibrant, and we're looking at how do schools afford to stay open, and who's paying membership dues, think of that poverty rate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people, full-time jobs are slowly coming back, but not to the same rate. I can tell you now as a Gen Xer, I've been 18 years on ODSP. I don't get a lot out of them except for my medical bills. And that's what makes it almost worthwhile to live under 804 rules of ODSP. 804 rules. It's crazy making rules. I'm not allowed to live with anyone. And if I do within 3 months, they have to take financial responsibility for me. Because apparently, I don't know, I don't have the same rights as everyone else in Ontario. I'm not allowed to sell my place because then I have too much in assets. There's so many weird rules. If 2 single women are on Ontario Works and they both have kids and they barter babysitting so they can work different shifts at different times. That's actually fraud on Ontario Works because they're bartering services. The laws are ridiculous and antiquated, and it needs an overhaul. It's just crazy. So I bend over backwards, 804 rules for less than $2,000 a year in actual amount, much less than 2,000. But I get drug benefits and dental benefits, which I wouldn't get otherwise. If I lost those benefits, it quite literally would not be worth me working. And that's a scary prospect. So did I miss anyone here? I mean, where do we want to go in the community with this? Because I think when we talk about the community as a whole, and I mean the Jewish community, not necessarily just Hamilton, I think this is something we have to plan for, is how we develop as a community. And sorry, I'm going to cough one more time. And that assuming people with the biggest pockets will continue to make things keep going, I don't think is a very safe way to plan our future. And we have to have a sustainable plan of sorts. And if people aren't getting married, if singles are actually living in poverty and they can't contribute in the same way, how do we structure our activities? You know, do we have $300, $500 galas if we want to include these people? What do we do that makes inclusion feel less like charity and more like belonging in our community, right? How do we involve people in a way and make it so that they can? I had this conversation with someone at the beginning of the pandemic. He said, I don't want people to shop for me. I want to go shop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people aren't necessarily always looking for, hated word, handouts per se. But if you are going to do grocery shopping every week anyhow, and you know someone that's more on a fixed income, invite them to go shopping with you.
I
It
love that you
saves
said
them.
that, because it's a big thing at JFS, is we're a hand up, not a handout. And that's so important.
Well, there are a lot of things people classify as handouts that kind of annoy me, but I tend to see it as this. And if you want a really Jewish quote for this, you know, we talk about leaving the corners of our fields, leaving the gleanings, and you're not supposed to pick up what you dropped, and, you know, don't be greedy about it because none of it really belongs to you, says the Torah. We don't have fields, most of us. I don't have fields. I've done some farm picking in my youth, but just as a family endeavor going out on the weekend, we didn't own farms or anything like that. But we do have taxes. And so supporting things, equalization, especially as jobs get worse. And worse isn't always pay, though it usually is pay as well. You know, not knowing which hours you're going to work over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and somehow you're going to raise a family without having an actual schedule. Like, that's not even law in Ontario, that you need to give people that information. There are no sick days. There are no, you know, there's so many things we could work towards. And what we do at the Roundtable is systems change. We just want governments to look at it from a different way because it's not sustainable. There's lost income. There's lost tax revenues from keeping people so hard up for money. There's real tangible things, harm done to the economy by continually doing that. And if you've spoken to a millennial, you'll understand that the job market as we knew it does not exist today. It just does not. Up until my 30s, I never applied for a job. Isn't that horrible to say? It is bad to say, isn't it? I was always, what are you doing? I heard you're not there. No, I'm not. Well, come apply, I never, ever applied for a job. Now, yeah, millennials are like the kings and queens of job resumes and job hunting. Like, they can make us look like such idiots that we never knew what we were doing. Like, they have this down pat. They know how to do it. I remember my stepfather at one point getting his, 10 resumes and walking down a commercial street or a light industrial street. And by the end of the day, he had a job. He'd go door to door. Are you hiring? What are you looking for? And he'd have a job that does not exist anymore. It just doesn't. And there's so much downsizing and so much automation. Pretty soon truck driving, which is probably being the most, transportation as being the most untouched industry we've had for a long time. Now they want to automate trucks for Amazon, for UPS, for shipping our vegetables. Well, those are jobs. They're still jobs, people jobs. And I'm not sure where we're going to come up with the newer jobs. Anyone remember general education or basic education in high school? Do you remember that? That you could go into a trade in high school. We've lost those jobs because we don't do manufacturing anymore, not to the same extent we did 30 years ago. And so we're shifting, but we're not quite sure what we're shifting to yet. And that has meant incredible precarity for Amy. Yes, so true. Yes, she's a millennial. She understands what I'm talking about. It's constant survival for them. So even looking at them in our community and saying, what can we do? Talking about housing, do we want to build some cooperative housing? Everything's on the table, right? So much is needed. So yeah, continue the conversation for sure. And I'm going to shut up now. I'm so sorry. I'm stopping.
No, I think this is great. I want to say, if anyone else has questions, I think ask questions right now, because having this dialogue is really important. And I think I'm hoping we're honestly, based on this, and if you guys are interested in the audience, give me a little thumbs up or reaction. But I would like this to be a series of conversations, because you've just raised some really good questions for the Hamilton Jewish community as well as the broader community. How do we, I don't want to use a buzzword, but how do we re-envision what community looks like, and how do we build a truly inclusive and also equitable community where everyone can participate in a way that is dignified, because that is a big thing. I'm seeing some hands up. I love it. I love
Okay,
it.
Hands up
well,
is good.
I'm just going to say very briefly, I'm not Jewish, but I graduated from U of T just in November. So although I was on ODSP 10 years ago and still am, I ended up getting my degree. So positive things are possible on ODSP.
Yay.
However, the cost of doing that was just really, really unnecessary. The human cost of what I saw in myself. I was at U of T. The last few courses of my degree I took in Jewish studies, and I really, 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 really enjoyed it. So I feel like I'm an ally to this community, and I want to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you and congratulations. I had the university conversation with the province while we were doing the roadmap, and it wasn't really included in the roadmap, but I said, I can't work full-time. I will never work full-time again. I work part-time. And if I want to get a degree to help me more judiciously and higher income per hour, which is, you know, specialize, get a better hourly rate, even though I can't work that many hours. The cost of a degree is the same for me as someone working full-time.
Yeah.
And yet trying to pay it back with less money doesn't make sense. And it's when they started looking at removing or granting with, you know, ODSP or people with disabilities in general, the Fed stepped up. And yeah, I have to give it to Flaherty. There is grants available, but the province hadn't. And so there's so many ways that aren't, it's not income, but they're resources, right?
Yeah.
What, yeah.
Band-aids, though. There's still Band-aids. I'm still looking for a bigger solution.
Well,
That's such a broader conversation.
It is. So I'll give you two possible further conversations. So I was on the basic income pilot here in Hamilton. I only received the disability amount. I was earning too much or had too much income from other sources for the base amount. And it was life-changing for me. I didn't understand how $500 could be so life-changing, but it was. It forced me into thinking as a professional, what was it about that money? What was it covering that I was not getting in my life otherwise? Social inclusion was a huge part of that. And I'm going to put Steve on the spot here, but Steve and Pam, even being able to buy them a slice of pizza and a soft drink because they brought me to choir like 2-3 times a week, depending on what season it was, or, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot, but just being able to feel like I can say thank you in a meaningful way to people. And I found I could dream. And when I talk about BI and the gift that it gives, is the ability to dream again. It's enough to do renovations that have gone undone in my apartment for 8 years and starting to save. And of course it was canceled and I can't do that now. It was the opportunity to refresh clothes that quite literally had holes in very inopportune places in my pants, which made thank goodness my grandmother was a seamstress and I could do a little bit of darning there. But it was all those little things that we take for granted that were no longer a worry. It was, I got on in October and December, my toilet completely broke down. I'm in a condo, so it's my responsibility. My toilet broke. And I had renewed my mortgage that year. And the bank contacted me in December and said, oh, we forgot some charges. So we're just going to take it out of your account at the end of the month. And if it wasn't for basic income, I wouldn't have eaten for about a week and a half at the end of the month. So when I talk about the ability to weather storms, to have that resource to not lose everything just because something unexpected like your toilet breaking happening, it was huge. And the other thing I realized, it put me at what we call a living wage, which is another conversation for the community. What's a living wage? What's the difference between a basic income and a living wage? What's the difference between social assistance and basic income and a living wage? What's the difference between minimum wage and living wage? It's a conversation I find people don't consider very much. And I have to say, in my career, even before I got sick, I was making enough that it wasn't really an issue. I haven't really dealt with poverty. It's maybe in my very early childhood when my parents were first separated. But but I never personally thought about it that way. I mean, I was a kid, I had hand-me-down clothing, I went to school, I was fine. And as an adult, I had good jobs. And then I was like, wow, there's a different life out there. So, yeah. I said I was going to stop. I really am going to stop. Yay, Cindy. Yeah, it's always interesting. It's always interesting having these conversations because I'm not sure where people are coming from. And I try not to get political about them. You know, I go for systems change and I really don't care what political party you follow or what party a politician belongs to. In my job, it really doesn't mean anything. Show me what you're going to do. What ideas are you going to implement? I couldn't care less about your campaigning and the slogans. Like when I get into your office and we close the door, don't give me any slogans. It doesn't work.
Well, may I say something?
Sure.
Like there's been a gap though, because honestly, it's like the intention and the outcome, like there's like this 20, 30, maybe 50-year lag or something. You know, we intended the policies to act this way, and now all of a sudden, decades later, we're becoming consciously aware that it's not working out that way. But some people have known along the way. I don't know.
I think there are attitudes towards poverty that, quite frankly, especially social assistance. And so,
because we're going to look really bad politically, even though I like ruling out the politics of this conversation.
yeah,
We're looking bad.
yeah, it's social assistance is something no one wants to tackle. And policies aren't always to help people. Policies are to manage money for some governments. And I don't mean political parties. I mean, literally, it is how they govern. It's the objective of the government, right? So changes to social assistance right now, I don't care how much of my document you used and my phrasing. If you're not putting money into it, you're actually just looking for ways to kick people off.
You're just being a troll. I mean, that's what the government's been, a troll.
Yeah, well, yeah. The
the
troll is a good word.
I have to run, but thank you so much.
Oh, great meeting you.
Yes, I'm going to give you my, let me just show you who I am. So I'm sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm on Facebook if you want to follow there, or also on Twitter. Twitter I'm not on as much anymore. I don't have the time. I don't have the time to do all these conversations on social media. But I do post a lot. And so, yeah, I think if even we start in our own community, it'll be time. Thanks, Mala. Bye. I think it's time to have the conversation locally and go topic by topic. Let's talk about housing and jobs. And, I think when we get a good grasp of that, if there's anyone here that's on any of the shul boards, take a good look. McMaster Labor Department, Labor Studies. Take a look at their millennial survey, employment for millennials, and you'll understand as a community why it's going to be important for us to look at this in the next 10 years. Well, now, forget about 10 years. They're just not going to have the jobs we had, and they're not going to have money in the same way. And we're going to need to find a way to continue as a community without the same income coming in for programming. And it's a divisive conversation because I think there's a lot of history and memories, and this is the way we do things that may not fit this younger group. And it's not because it's a style thing or disrespect thing. I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with the way we do things. And it's going to be hard. Most of them working more than one job, if they can find work. It's scary.
So Laura, I think, I mean, I don't even think we're ending this on I think part of me is like, oh, this is a pessimistic note, but this is a real note that we need to start having these conversations in the community. And I think I'm so excited to see kind of the reaction when we floated about, maybe having a series of these conversations, because I think knowledge is power. And the more we can have these conversations within the Jewish community, within the broader community, within the Jewish to broader community, the stronger we become and the better able we are to even start thinking about how to address these issues and how to engage people to address these issues. I know, just thinking about your talk today, everything you said resonated with clients or people who I almost want to say guests of JFS, because they come to us. I actually hate the term clients because it sounds really like here we are doing this like service. But where I've really tried to, or where the agency has really started to engage, is this idea of wraparound supports. So it is becoming a hub for someone comes in, they need help with the food bank, and they're talking and they say, you know what, I also need help with, I need some counseling. Great, we have a counselor here. You can see them. And then we have case management where they can actually work with the people to make the referrals they need and the supports, because when you are downtrodden by the system, the last thing, and I firmly believe this, the last thing you want to hear is, okay, here's a list of things, go on and
go do it.
Go do it. Go do it.
Go do it. Yeah.
So, and I think, Amy's point is like about the hand up is we will sit with you and help you to reach out to those service providers. We will do the advocacy. But, long story short is that these conversations are so necessary because our poor or financially marginalized within the community, from what I see, are largely invisible.
Yep.
And when
we are.
And so we need to have these conversations. And so I'm thrilled about how tonight went. Everybody was silent, so I think that is a good thing. But is
it a good thing? I just sometimes I don't know if people are engaged, and I don't know, okay, here's what I get. I'm going to give you a story from one of the people I work with too. So what I tend to get is, oh, but people in poverty aren't like you, Laura. I'll go through all this. I'll do an hour and a half. And at the end, well, they're not like you. It's those other poor people we don't want to help. I'm like, who are you talking about, those other poor people? Those nameless people that are undeserving? Like, and this is why I switched what I did tonight, because I didn't want to talk about, who the poor were in terms of numbers. I think people have to understand they're all around you. And this is where they get limited. And so you might not notice it anymore, especially older people and people with disabilities. Like, hello, that's our community, right? Like, this is everyone around us every time I go to shul on a Friday night, right? Like, who's showing up? Our seniors and people with disabilities. And as I heard someone say, our lost friends, right? Like, just people that need other people right now. And that is what poverty is about. right? It's those people that need other people right now. And if you are blessed to have a strong family and adequate income in that family, and you know, you can move into mom's again on a sofa if you know you absolutely need to. I can't do that. I have no family left. You know, I don't have those resources. And so yeah, it's a spiritual thing as well. And I wanted I wanted to say there was someone I was working with, a client on social assistance. I didn't work with them as a social worker. That's not what I do. But he was like, you know, they keep throwing the word, you know, you're a client, and all the posters in the office say client and client and client. And he got in to see a caseworker. His was not available. And she used the word client. He was like, if I were really your client, you'd be fired.
Yeah.
And she was so taken aback, but it's true. I'm not your client. I'm at your whim and your beck and call, and I have no autonomy in this system whatsoever. And it was just like, oh no. It's like, but she learned. I'm like, oh, I'm sure she did. Talking to people, there are people being hit hard. We haven't even started mental health and poverty, because we talk about disability and everyone thinks of wheelchairs, but the biggest disability right now is mental health. And so when we look at mental health and disability, my friend Tim, he was also on the Basic Income Pilot, so he's sort of famous for this, so I feel okay mentioning his name. He's a speaker for the roundtable on basic income. Tim has acquired brain injury. Or no, you say it was back injury. I'm sorry, I got this wrong. Back injury, and he was just going to train and become a security guard, and he was going to train and become a security guard. And we're talking years and years and years of seeing him at anti-poverty meetings, and he keeps saying the same thing. And you couldn't help but notice that he had difficulty, sometimes more than others, communicating, being hyper and being loud and disruptive and not listening. And there was nothing we can do about it, because the way the system works, unless someone voluntarily seeks help, you can't do anything unless you're going to fully commit them, which is a pretty high bar to meet. And so he got on the Basic Income Pilot. He was on just Ontario Works, not disability. And for the first time in a very long time, he had life stabilization. It's what we work towards, right? Wraparound supports. So he got out of the rooming house he was in and got his own place and ate well, probably for the first time in a very, very long time. And when he was safe and no longer getting into fights and eating well and sleeping well, he realized he needed help with mental health. And so he went for a full assessment and got on a treatment program with medication. And December 23rd, around the same time I was having my toilet issues, I get an email, my boss, myself, and our other coworker, he sent an email to the three of us, thanking us for thinking of him to refer to the Basic Income Pilot, and that he was happy and stable, probably the most he'd been in decades, and that he was up in Timmins First time he had seen his sister in more than 10 years. And the greatest gift that basic income gave him was the money to travel to Timmins. So while it snowed for the last 24 hours, he could shovel snow for her to return his thanks for everything she had tried to do for him while he was unwell and didn't know it.
Wow.
And seeing the change in Tim in just 3 months of having adequate income, we're talking $1,700 a month, not even CERB, right? Like we're talking 17, well, no, it was 17,000. It's not 1,700 a month. Someone has a calculator. I'm no longer thinking at this point. Just looking at him, seeing happy and healthy and focused and calm and just so gung-ho to spread the word that, you know, all these people you gave up on could actually be okay again. And sure enough, with the cancellation of the pilot, a lot of the people that we saw that transformation with went back the other way. One of my friends died. He used his BI money with disability bonus to pay for home care because he was using public home care. They weren't showing up when they said they were going to show up. They weren't consistent in how they helped him. And so with his BI money, he paid for home care. And his sores got better. He had less infections. And he was just so happy to have clean clothes. And his way of describing it was to feel like a human being again. To feel like he was human and he had dignity. And the minute the cancellation was announced, he and a few others started talking about just dying, just killing themselves because they couldn't go back to the filth. You know, he was paralyzed in a wheelchair. So if no one came, he'd literally sit in his own filth and abscesses and sores. And he didn't make it. He ended up dying in less than a year after the pilot was canceled. And his sister, I mean, it's not a claim you could take to court. But his sister's like, it's the cancellation that killed him. Mm-hmm. Like it just was. He wouldn't have had these infections again. So yes, I'm a bit of a basic income vigilante, though I'm very careful about what I mean by basic income. There are a lot of different people talking a lot of different things out there, so be cautious. Not all ideas are equal. Sorry, I didn't mean to go there. I wanted the funny though, you know, so like, I'm not your client. I can't fire you.
You know what, Laura? I think you gave us a really good topic for our next talk about poverty and mental health. I think the other thing that you just gave us was when we talk about poverty and we talk about, you know, the idea of transformational change and systems change and societal change, we also need to hear the cold, hard reality. And it is gut-wrenching and it is heartbreaking. But I think it reminds us that we have a moral imperative to each other as human beings to do better, to take care of each other, and to always remember the dignity of people. Every person is, you know, with that divine spark. They have been, you know, with that, we're all we like creations of God. So I think we have that, we have to keep that, carry it forward. So, you know, we have to remember that in all of our work. So, I really, really appreciate this. I think we have a lot of food for thought. I know I do personally, along with at an agency level. And I'm just really excited that this conversation can continue. And I'm grateful everyone showed up tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
anytime. And yes, if we can narrow down topics, I'd be makes it so much easier.
We did. We did a
Just
big
cover
opening.
poverty.
Thank
Yes, for
you.
sure. Anything you need.
Thank you.